everyone. We're from Youth United for Change. My name's B. My pronouns are they, them. I am the civic engagement lead and also an alumni. So I graduated while I was so I started in high school and I've been in the org for 4 years. That's that.
And hey, y'all, my name is Kat, and I'm the Civic Engagement Coordinator at YUC, and I use she, her pronouns. Ah. Um, Before we get started, we wanted to just share a little bit about who we are. So YUC, or Youth United for Change, works to build the leadership of working class Black and Latinx young people to organize for better conditions in their communities. And historically, we've worked on school-based issues, but we recently expanded in 2018 to include voting and broader community fights. And something else that's important to know about us is that we're based in Kensington, which is a working class neighborhood in Philly, mostly made up of Puerto Rican, Black, and white folks. And the neighborhood used to be a huge industrial hub in the city, but like many types of areas like this has seen a lot of deindustrialization, white flight, and disinvestment over decades, which has led to deepening of poverty and worse living conditions in the neighborhood. And a prime example of this is that there is an ever expanding amount of homelessness and in the neighborhood, and the neighborhood is the center of the opioid epidemic in the city.
In 2018, we began building out our community chapter and electoral efforts. We use the elections as a way to engage with community members around both political processes as well as the work we do. You can go to the next slide. So our community safety campaign, um, before beginning our campaign, we started off surveying community members during each election around their biggest concerns in the neighborhood. Many people identified safety as the biggest issue. So from there, we created our framework, which looks at safety more broadly because working class communities face many types of harms on a regular basis. Our framework also looks at the system rather than the individual. So COVID hit and the pandemic exposed many more safety issues. From there, we had the opportunity to talk more about what our neighborhoods could look like if they were truly safe. But in order to get there, yeah, okay, but in order to get there, we have to come together and organize. You can go to the next slide now. During the summer work, we were able to have the opportunity for deep leadership development. Members had a lot more time to dedicate, so we were able to have more intensive political education than previous summers, as well as more leadership roles to help the members grow in their leadership. You can go to the next slide. This is a key lesson. So the intensive political and leadership development set a foundation for members to have deeper level conversations around safety with community members, understanding the underlying reasons. Also, we're able to gain the skills to facilitate political education content and use the developed skills. Using the developed skills, members are now recruiting and organizing community members. So having more time for outreach, we're able to expand and reach out to more people in our council district than we were able to before. From there, we were introduced to more community members who are now engaged with our work. This is another key lesson. In order to do the work and build the power we need to continue expanding our organization as well as have the resources to do so.
Cool. And another thing that we saw during the pandemic was the opportunity to consistently build with community members. So outside of the pandemic, each year a pocket of the neighborhood is usually contacted by us about 3 times, if that, during the year, mostly about election issues. But with the pandemic, it meant that we were able to contact community members more often and about different issues. So things like resources, like how to access resources for COVID, information about what to do or not do in the pandemic, information about how to vote and vote safely, and getting connected to community-based issues. And this was important because in our part of the city, nobody was reaching out to community members about COVID resources. And that included not even having Spanish translations available for monolingual Spanish speakers in the neighborhood. And then on top of that, later in the year, people were getting nonstop calls from folks outside of the community about the election because we're in a swing state. And so people are really, folks in the neighborhood were really weary of people's intentions when folks were trying to do outreach. And so when we called and they heard that we were based in the neighborhood and working on local problems, people opened up and were super excited to talk with us. And some people who remembered us from past summers were like, I remember seeing you, you all out with your yellow shirts, or I remember talking to you on the phone a few months ago. Um, and that was really exciting because they were starting to build some trust with us. And so this reinforced the lesson that before we can even show up to say what our politics are, it matters how we show people what we're about. And so when people haven't been invested in for so long, consistently engaging them builds the type of trust that's needed in order for deep base building to take place. And then finally, with worsening conditions in the pandemic, plus major political unrest that was happening, um, it made it all like super clear that just because our people are oppressed, it doesn't automatically mean that they agree with our politics. And so in Kensington, especially during the pandemic and after the uprisings, people wanted more police. And they want consequences for people that use drugs and those who are experiencing homelessness. And that is because living in the neighborhood is really shitty, and that's an undeniable fact. Um, but they see the reason why the neighborhood feels the way that it does and the experiences that they're having as the fault of others that can be solved by more policing. And this means that we have to do the work of struggling over these types of ideas to unify various working class groups in the neighborhood. And in order to do that, we realized that just telling people policing was bad didn't actually cause people to shift their beliefs and be supportive of more progressive safety policies. If anything, people wouldn't want to talk to us. So instead, we did the work of trying to understand underneath it all, what were people really trying to articulate when they pushed for certain harmful policies in the neighborhood, and how those issues actually get solved through systemic changes instead of blaming individuals for the choices that they've made. And we had to speak to the concrete experiences that people had in the neighborhood. Like we couldn't ignore the things that people were experiencing. We had to speak and point them out in order to help them understand that these things are systemic and not the fault of certain types of people in our neighborhoods. And so most of the people that we talked to had never engaged in these types of conversation, which means that critical groups of people in our city were not being moved into the types of progressive politics that we're trying to advance. And that's happening despite a lot of the fights that we're waging happening on behalf of these types of communities. And so something that we realize is that these conversations are really hard and they take a lot of time. And that is really something that we're going to have to work on um, if we're going to be able to build the type of power that we need. And there's no shortcut around it. People have been in the system for a really long time. And so there's a lot of stuff that has to be unlearned. And it's only going to happen by us having conversations and moving people along. And if we don't do that, we're going to alienate whole masses of people that we need to win. So that's all we have. Thank you.